Most musicians hope to have a song or two that really connects with people. Robbie Robertson, along with the band, made some of the greatest albums of all time. Robbie Robertson died yesterday. Today, we remember his legacy.
It makes no difference where I turn. I can't get over you and the flame still burns.
My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. You're listening to Commotion. Listen, can I just tell you, my favorite way that anyone has described the band is also my favorite way that anyone's ever described any band ever, and it comes from Bruce Springsteen. In Once We're Brothers, the documentary about the band and Robbie Robertson, Bruce said, it's like you'd never heard them before, unlike they'd always been there. I love that so much. I think that's accurate. The band made timeless music, eternal music, music that had this quality of you having just stumbled upon this buried treasure. The engine behind the band was Robbie Robertson. Robbie wrote most of the songs that became this timeless, eternal music. You know the songs. You know Up on Cripple Creek. You know The Wait. You know Ophelia. Robbie Robertson died yesterday. He was 80 years old, so today we are remembering him. Musician and legendary producer Daniel Lanois was friends with Robbie Robertson and made a lot of music with him over the years. Tom Wilson is a musician, author, and massive admirer of Robbie's who shares Robbie's Mohawk roots. Tom and Daniel are with me right now. Welcome to the show, everybody. Thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here. You're very welcome. Tom, are you in Jamaica?
Not in Jamaica yet, Dan. I'm in Hamilton, where I think I belong.
We should also tell people that you guys know each other quite well. Like that is a little bit of the background they're working here with. Can I just say to both of you, I'm really sorry for your loss. Daniel, I'm going to start with you. You last saw Robbie in the spring. How was he then?
Last I saw Robbie, he was good. Saw him in Los Angeles, and we had a fun little get-together. There's a picture of me, Robbie, and Bob Ezrin together in the control room. So we got to fish that out.
What were you guys doing? Were you guys working on some music? What was the general vibe?
Well, Robbie's got a studio at the Village Recorder where I was with the guys from U2 downstairs. We were just singing some oohs and ahs and some backgrounds, and Robbie stuck his head in, and it was all home week.
That's beautiful. Tom, let me ask you, what went through your mind when you first heard the news?
Well, really, we've lost a great storyteller, is what I thought. I know that the ability to tell stories is what separates us from the mob. And I also know that Robbie shares Mohawk blood with me. And all I can tell you is that we learn our history, we learn about our blood, we learn about our culture and our colors through our stories. You know, it's music that ignites us. Storytelling is how we learn, and the kitchen table is our classroom. You know,
would you say, Daniel, you had a lot of opportunities to work with him. You worked with him on songs like this one. Daniel, would you take us into the studio when you were producing with him or onto the stage? What was he like? What was it like to be around him as he worked?
Oh, he was full of life and imagination, as Tom pointed out. You know, a great storyteller. So most of the work we did together was in a small studio that Robbie has at the Village, or had, and just the two of us talking about what could be. And I said, what was it like when you were a kid, Robbie? He said, well, I want to go down south and meet Sonny Boy Williams and some of the other blues people down there. And I said, well, what was it like when you got down there? He says, well, there was always something rumbling down the crazy river. So that's what he just started telling stories about the river. So I said, well, there's a song in there somewhere, Robbie.
And what a song it is that you made. Tom, same question for you. You only performed with him one time, but as a musician, why would you say he was such a singular talent?
Well, he had the ability. He's proving actually to me more so today that he bridged generations. I mean, parents, children both share a love for him. I can tell you that inside my family. My daughter loved the band so much that she told me, "Dad, if I would have been 17 in 1969, I would have run away with the Hawks." There's that. My grandchildren also have the same natural love for what the band did, for how they created music is something that we have to go on appreciating, because it was so from the earth, built from the earth up,
One of the biggest contributions to culture writ large that the band gave us is, of course, their farewell concert, The Last Waltz, which is considered one of the greatest, if not the greatest, rock and roll films of all time. Let's play a little bit of their performance of Up on Cripple Creek with guitar by Robbie, vocals by Levon Helm, Robbie, and Rick Danko.
I'm going up on Cripple Creek. She sends me in my spring a leak. She bends me. I don't have to speak. She defends me a drunken string if I ever did see one.
Daniel, we should say, Martin Scorsese made this incredible documentary, right? Of course, we remember The Last Waltz as kind of the gold standard of concert films. What's amazing about it is you see Robbie's kind of incredible knack for drawing in all these incredibly talented musicians. You got Mavis Staples, you got Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, Ringo Starr, everybody. You could go on, keep going. It's one thing to be respected, but it's a whole other thing for all of these legends to want to jump on the stage with you. How would you describe Robbie's pull?
Well, Robbie always enjoyed being in the circus and like to have characters around him. And so he was not only a band leader, but a great scene setter, and would be able to direct people to be those characters. So it was not only music. He understood that the people in his very band were outstanding characters, and their contribution should be that, not just musical.
We should also say Robbie collaborated closely with Martin Scorsese for years after that. Robbie worked on many of his movies, just on the score side of things, including The Irishman, Wolf of Wall Street, Gangs of New York. He actually did compose the score for the upcoming Scorsese movie, Killers of the Flower Moon. Robbie talked about his relationship with Martin, with Tom Power on cue. Take a listen to this.
Every movie, we start from scratch. What are we going to do this time? And I would describe something to him, a sound, a flavor to him. And he'd say, "Oh, that's good, as long as it doesn't sound like movie music." Now we're talking my language. Because doing a traditional movie score, he doesn't need me for that. There's people that do that, and they do it really well, but I'm not interested in that. And thankfully, neither is he.
We should say Martin Scorsese released a statement mourning Robbie's death. He said, quote, "It goes without saying that he was a giant. There's never enough time with anyone you love, and I loved Robbie." Daniel, can I just ask you, what made Robbie's film work so powerful?
I think if I can go to Raging Bull, to understand that maybe a tiny bell sound would be the most powerful component to put in a heavy scene. So so you could hear the crushing of the skull more clearly.
Right.
So just a really smart guy with great taste. What can I say? Every inch of the way. Be it something he would do for Marty or something he would do for himself.
And Tom, we should say, Robbie grew up in Toronto, but he frequently visited his mother's side of the family at Six Nations of the Grand River Reserve. He told APTN that this is where his love for music and storytelling began.
Every time we went back, everybody in the family, it seemed to me, played an instrument. Everybody played an instrument or sang or danced. Because there wasn't like a lot of entertainment coming through town back then. We had to provide our own entertainment.
And so that's what made me say, I want to be in this club. I want to play music too. And then the other side of it was the storytellers, that when the elders would speak, it just gave me chills. I thought, I want to be able to tell stories like that.
Tom, when you hear that, how do you think about that showing up in his storytelling? How do you think that showed up in his music?
Well, the same way that I try to do my own work through my book writing and my own songwriting. This is like the seed. As I said, the kitchen table is our classroom for a lot of us, and that's one thing that Robbie, Robertson, probably Dan, and I all share, is that family around the table, or even strangers or neighbors around the table playing music. I mean, you got to remember that down at 6 one of the birthplaces of what we call Americana music sits down on the Mystic Highway, Highway 6 South, that runs from Hamilton to Lake Erie. It cuts through the Six Nations, tobacco fields, through migrant workers from the Caribbean, as well as local talent plugging into country music. You know what I mean? Like there's this mixture. And that's around where Robbie Robertson spent his summers, the bloodland of his mother. And it's where up the road, a kid named Rick Danko grew up shitting in a Crisco can in Turkey Point. This is an important place, and the Six Nations and that kitchen table that Robbie Robertson grew up around was important. The same as it was for me in Hamilton with my uncle Jim Bove from Ganawage.
Did you and Robbie ever talk about the way that your roots played a role in the music that you create?
No. I mean, I'm here as somebody that loved his work, but I'll tell you something about the storytelling. The first time I was in the Broadway theater on King William in Hamilton, and watching The Last Waltz, and Robbie Robertson owned the screen. He owned that theater, not because he didn't share it with his band members, but because his ability to tell stories. In fact, Levon Helm's ability to tell stories. These were kindred spirits that obviously grew up. And I can't stress enough the importance of the atmosphere of a kitchen with smoke and beer and coffee and people yelling and people singing and people telling stories. There's joy. And I think that when I heard Up on Cripple Creek from The Last Waltz, you can feel that joy. And Dan and I were talking about this summer about, let's go get the joy. Let's drop everything else that surrounds us or that might be getting into us and surrender to the joy of playing music. And that's what you could hear in that song, Up on Cripple Creek.
Tom, we should also tell people, Robbie's family is asking that instead of flowers, people donated his name to the Six Nations of the Grand River to support a new Woodland Cultural Center. This is also a cause that's very important to you. Can you just tell us a little bit about it?
Well, the Woodland, yes, it is. Heather George and Patricia Dadman down there are running a great show. The Woodland Cultural Center is our living culture on display and in action, and it stands tall beside the devastating darkness of the Mohawk Institute Indian Residential School. So what the Woodland Cultural Center does, it represents, promotes, and educates Haudenosaunee topics, ranging from art and history, and informs and confirms in workshops addressing truth and reconciliation, stereotypes, racism, and land claims around the Six Nations. In particular, the Grand River land tract, which is 6 miles each side of the Grand River. So hats off to you one more time, Robbie Robertson, for standing with your people and with your blood and keeping the Mohawk culture in the light.
Daniel, I want to talk a little bit about the credit that Robbie gets or maybe doesn't get, because Robbie and the band were such a big inspiration to so many huge stars who said, you know what, we would not be playing the same music that we play now if it wasn't for the band. He told this story to Tom Power on Q about the time Elton John and his songwriting partner, Bernie Taupin, came to talk to him. Listen to this.
But I do remember Bernie and Elton bringing me the first copy of a record they made. They said, this is in honor of the band. your music inspired this, and we wanted to give it to you so you didn't think we were trying to rip you off. And they made 2 albums that they said were completely Tumbleweed Connection and another one that they said was completely inspired by the band.
And it's good old country comfort in my bones.
I just love how his whole voice lights up as he remembers this memory. Daniel, do you think Robbie gets the credit he deserves? You know, where do you see his music kind of turn up?
Oh, I guess he gets plenty of credit, especially in the songwriting world. Obviously, he's been a forefather to a lot of us, a trailblazer, and anywhere I go, Robbie gets plenty of credit.
I guess maybe to close this out, Daniel, finally as a friend, what will you miss most about Robbie?
I guess I would miss the depths that we would go to talking about life, songs, where they come from, and where imagination comes from. One of the greats.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Tom Wilson, Daniel Lanois, thank you so much for being here to remember the legendary Robbie Robertson. Thank you so much.
Very welcome.
That is from 1987. That's a bit of Robbie Robertson with Fallen Angel. Before that, you heard my conversation with Daniel Lanois and Tom Wilson, remembering the legendary Robbie Robertson. He died yesterday. Tom Wilson actually chose that song for us to play. For more on the story, go to cbcnews.ca. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and you're listening to Commotion. Listen, before we go, we just wanted to pay tribute to another legendary voice that we lost this week. Take a listen to this.
Sugar man, won't you hurry? 'Cause I'm tired of these scenes. For a blue coin.
A bit of the late great Rodriguez with Sugar Man. Maybe you watched his story in the documentary film Searching for Sugar Man. The Mexican-American singer died on Tuesday. He was 81 years old. Here's the thing about Rodriguez's story, in case you've not seen Sugar Man. He was such a talented, unique artist who went from relative obscurity to massive international success. And it's this story that kind of spans decades, right? Because back in the 70s, his music didn't exactly take off in the US, and his record label ends up dropping him. But then later, he becomes a massive star, but in South Africa. The songs that he writes about Vietnam War, about social issues, about racial inequity, they find a massive home there. But by the time that he's big in South Africa, Rodriguez had already hung up his guitar. Actually, he was working construction in Detroit and had no idea just how massive a hit that song was on the other side of the world. Because back then, there were rumors that he had died. No one really knew where to find him. And then decades later, these two fans track him down at his home in Detroit, and they tell him how popular his music is back in South Africa, how everybody kind of grew up with his songs as kind of the soundtracks of their lives. The documentary maker, his name is Malik Benjalul, he talked to As It Happens a few years back. Here's Malik describing how that call went.
And for Rodriguez, they tell him that you are more famous, than the Rolling Stones. And he hangs up the phone. He thinks it's a crank call. It's a practical joke. And then they call him again and say, listen, this is true. And he says, but you got the wrong guy. I mean, I'm Rodriguez, the construction worker. I've been working as a construction worker for 30 years in downtown Detroit. No, did you make an album called Cold Fact? Yeah, that's my album. In South Africa, that album is more famous than Abbey Road. And they convince him to come down to South Africa, and he comes. He's greeted by paparazzis, red carpets, limousines, and security guards. And it's sold out stadiums. People are crying. He can't sing because the crowd is screaming too loud. And when he starts to sing, he has forgotten the words. But it doesn't matter because 5,000 people in the audience know every single word, and they sing the songs for him.
That's Malik Benjalul there. He directed the documentary Searching for Sugar Man. After the movie comes out in 2012, it ends up winning an Academy Award, and Rodriguez's music gets re-released all around the world, making him a star all over again. Rodriguez died on Tuesday. He was 81 years old.
Was it a huntsman or a player that made you pay the cost, that now assumes relaxed positions and prostitutes your loss? Were you tortured by your own thirst in those pleasures that you seek, that made you Tom the Curious, that makes you James the Weak?
I cannot recommend enough that you go watch the documentary Searching for Sugar Man. That is a bit of Crucify Your Mind by Rodriguez. He died on Tuesday. For more on his life and music, check out cbc.ca/music. And that is it for the show today. Remember, you can listen to any episode of Commotion anytime, live or on demand on the CBC Listen app or wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. I'll see you tomorrow.
As the tears roll down your cheeks,